The airport police officer didn't look angry. He just looked efficient, like he was reading a script someone else wrote. When he told me my boarding pass triggered a manual review, I didn't think of random screenings. I checked my watch. I had 48 hours to get to Ashford for my grandfather's hearing, and I realized with a sick, cold certainty that my parents weren't just ignoring my calls, they were the reason I was being detained. The red notification dot on my phone screen seemed innocent enough. It was just a digital speck, a pixelated crumb of information. But when I tapped it, the voicemail from Bramwell and Sutter Legal Group unspooled a message that effectively dismantled the quiet, carefully constructed life I had built in Lake Briar. Oregon, my grandfather, Arthur Bryant, was dead. The voice on the recording belonged to a paralegal. Her tone practiced and somber, stripping the news of any raw edge. She informed me that Arthur had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 days ago, and that a formal inheritance hearing was scheduled to take place in Ashford, Virginia, in exactly 48 hours. The timeline felt aggressive, almost predatory. Funerals were for mourning, hearings were for business. But then came the kicker, the sentence that made my stomach turn over. My attendance was strongly recommended due to a specific clause in the estate requiring in-person identification and testimony. I sat on the edge of my beige sofa, the phone cold in my hand. Outside, the rain of the Pacific Northwest hammered against the windowpane, a familiar gray rhythm that usually soothed me. Today, it sounded like static. Arthur was gone. The only person in the Bryant family who had ever looked at me and seen a human being rather than an investment or a disappointment was gone. I closed my eyes and saw him, Arthur, with his straight back and his smell of old paper and peppermint. He had not been a hugger, not really, but he had listened. When I told him 5 years ago that I was moving across the country to work as a financial analyst, effectively cutting myself off from the family orbit, he had not guilt-tripped me. He had nodded, looked me in the eye, and said that autonomy was the only asset that never depreciated. Now, he was gone, and the legal sharks were circling. I stood up and began to pace my small living room. The conflict rose in my throat like bile. I had been low contact with my parents, Diane and Mark, for nearly 3 years. It had not been a singular explosion that drove us apart, but rather a slow, toxic erosion. It was the constant requests for loans that were never repaid. It was the boundary stomping. It was the way Diane would sigh and tell me I was being selfish for wanting to keep my own paycheck. The final straw had been a blow-up over a co-signing request for a property investment that smelled wrong. I had said no. They had screamed that I was abandoning the family. I had packed my car and driven west until I hit the ocean. Going back to Ashford meant walking back into that cage. But this was Arthur. He had protected me in his own quiet way. If he had put a clause in his will requiring me to be there, he had done it for a reason. Arthur never did anything without a strategy. I booked the last seat on a red-eye flight out of Cedar Line International Airport. The ticket price was exorbitant, wiping out a significant chunk of my monthly savings, but I paid it without hesitation. I threw a black blazer, 2 blouses, and a pair of slacks into my carry-on. I did not pack checked luggage. I needed to be mobile. I needed to get in, testify, say goodbye to the only man I respected, and get out before Diane could sink her claws back in. The drive to the airport was a blur of highway lights and wet asphalt. My mind was racing, replaying old conversations, trying to armor myself against the inevitable emotional assault waiting for me in Virginia. I told myself I was 33 years old. I was a senior analyst. I managed risk for a living. I could handle my parents for 24 hours. Cedar Line International was quiet at 10 at night. The fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that induces headaches. I kept my head down, my boarding pass loaded on my phone, moving with the efficient stride of a seasoned traveler. I wanted to be invisible. I reached the security checkpoint and joined the pre-check line. I placed my bag on the conveyor belt, pushed my plastic bin forward, and walked through the metal detector. I expected the silence. I expected the boredom of the TSA agent on the other side. Instead, the machine let out a sharp, discordant beep. The agent, A man with heavy eyelids and a badge that looked too shiny under the lights did not wave me through. He held up a hand, palm out. "Please step to the side, ma'am." I sighed, shifting my weight. It happens. Random screenings were a statistical reality of travel. I stepped out of the lane, waiting for the wand, waiting for the pat-down, but the agent did not pick up the wand. He picked up a phone on the wall. He spoke 2 words into it, his eyes never leaving my face. "Supervisor needed." A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. I watched the other passengers flowing past me, grabbing their shoes and laptops, free to go. I stood in my socks, feeling suddenly small and exposed. 2 minutes later, 2 officers approached. They were not TSA, they were airport police. Their uniforms were dark blue, crisp, and intimidating. One was tall with a buzz cut. The other was shorter, stocky, with a face that gave away nothing. "Hazel Bryant?" the tall one asked. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded steady, which was a miracle. "Is there a problem with my bag?" "Please come with us, ma'am," the officer said. He gestured toward a door away from the main concourse. "We need to clear up a few administrative flags regarding your travel documents." Administrative flags. I checked my watch. My flight boarded in 40 minutes. "I have a flight to catch," I said, trying to keep the edge of panic out of my voice. "Can we do this here, number, ma'am?" the stocky officer said. His tone was polite but rigid, like a steel bar wrapped in velvet. "Please come with us." I followed them. I had no choice. They flanked me, 1 on each side, escorting me past the staring eyes of the other travelers. I felt a flush of humiliation rise in my cheeks. I had done nothing wrong. I was a boring financial analyst who paid her taxes early and drove the speed limit. They led me into a small, windowless interview room. The walls were painted a suffocating shade of institutional cream. There was a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. The air smelled of stale sanitizer and recycled dust. "Sit down, please," the tall officer said. I sat. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers to stop them from trembling. "What is this about?" I asked. "I need to know why I am being detained." The tall officer opened a folder he had been carrying. He didn't look at me. He looked at the papers. "Ms. Bryant, your boarding pass triggered a manual review in our system. We received a credible tip regarding your travel today." A tip, I frowned. That made no sense. I had booked the ticket 3 hours ago. Who gives tips about financial analysts flying to probate hearings? What kind of tip? I demanded. The officer looked up. His eyes were flat. "The alert suggests you may be carrying unauthorized financial instruments and identity-related documents that are flagged for seizure." The words hung in the dead air of the room. Unauthorized financial instruments. It sounded like something from a bad spy novel. "That is ridiculous," I said, my analyst brain kicking in. "I am carrying a laptop, a Kindle, and a change of clothes. You have my bag. You can search it. I have no financial instruments other than my personal credit cards." The officer did not blink. "We are verifying that now. However, until the flag is cleared, you cannot board a commercial aircraft." The panic flared, hot and bright. If I missed this flight, there wasn't another one until tomorrow afternoon. I would miss the start of the hearing. I would violate the clause. "Who submitted this tip?" I asked. "We cannot disclose that information." The officer said, "I need to make a phone call." I said, "If I'm going to miss my flight, I need to let my family know." The officers exchanged a look. The stocky one nodded. Briefly, he said. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked my phone. My first instinct was to call Bramwell and Sutter. But it was late. No one would answer. I had to call my parents. They were in Ashford. They could tell the lawyer I was delayed. They could fix this. I dialed Diane's number. It rang once, twice. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hazel, her voice came through the speaker. Light and airy. "We did not expect to hear from you, Mom," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "I am at the airport. The police have stopped me." There was a pause. It was too short. A normal mother would have gasped. A normal mother would have screamed. "What are you okay?" Diane just hummed. "Oh," Hazel, always something dramatic, isn't it? I gripped the phone tighter. I am not being dramatic. I said, security pulled me off the line. They are saying there is a flag on my name, something about unauthorized financial documents. I might miss the flight. Diane let out a sigh, the sound of long-suffering patience that had defined my childhood. Well, honey, maybe it is for the best. I froze. What do you mean, for the best? You know how stressed you get, Diane said. Her voice was soothing, too soothing. It was the voice she used when she was trying to talk a creditor out of a late fee, flying all the way here, dealing with the hearing. It is a lot. Maybe you should just reschedule, handle things later. The hearing does not really matter anyway. It is just procedural. The calmness in her voice needled me more than anger would have. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Diane lived for drama. She should be wailing about the injustice of it all. Instead, she sounded relieved. Mom, I said, lowering my voice so the officers wouldn't hear. I have to be there. The voicemail said my attendance is required. Oh, lawyers always say that, Diane said dismissively. They just want to bill more hours. Just go home. Hazel, get some rest. We can catch you up on everything afterwards. Mark and I have it handled. She called Dad Mark. She never did that when talking to me. She always said your father. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She didn't want me there. She wasn't worried about me being detained. She was banking on it. I looked at the officer across the table. He was writing something on a form, on the clipboard, underneath his hand. I saw a printed sheet of paper. It was upside down. But I had spent a decade reading balance sheets across desks from lying CEOs. I knew how to read upside down. I saw the header Department of Homeland Security referral, and underneath, in the comments section, a phrase caught my eye. Estate interference risk. My blood went cold. That was not police terminology. That was not airport security jargon. Estate interference risk was legal language. It was the kind of specific, weaponized phrasing a lawyer would use to freeze an asset, or a beneficiary. Hazel Diane asked, Are you there? I am here. I said, my voice dropping to a monotone. I have to go. Mom, the signal is bad. I hung up before she could say another word. I looked at the officer. I want to speak to a supervisor, I said. The officer sighed. Ma'am, I am the supervising officer for this shift. No, I said firmly. I want the airport security duty manager. I want the person who oversees the intake of these tips, because I am looking at your clipboard. And that document says, estate interference risk. That is a civil legal term, not a criminal one. Someone is using you to settle a private score. The officer stiffened. He flipped the clipboard over, covering the paper. You are not authorized to view these documents. Get me a supervisor. I repeated, I will sit here quietly. I will be cooperative. But I'm not saying another word until someone with higher clearance walks through that door. I pulled out my phone. I did not open the camera. I opened my notes app. I typed the time. I typed the officer's badge number. I typed the phrase, estate interference risk. I typed Diane's tone calm, dismissive, rehearsed. My anxiety was a hummingbird in my chest, beating its wings against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, but I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They would label me unstable. They would put me in a holding cell. They would make sure I missed not just this flight, but every flight for the next week. So I forced myself into a statue. I crossed my legs. I breathed in for 4 counts, held for 4, out for 4. I became the analyst. I became the observer. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A man in a gray suit walked in. He looked tired. He had the distinct air of a man who spent his life cleaning up messes he didn't make. He wore a laminate badge that read, Nolan Price, Duty Manager, Mr. Price. I presume, I said. Nolan Price looked at the officers, then at me. He nodded to the officers. Give us a moment. The officers hesitated, then filed out. Nolan Price sat in the chair opposite me. He didn't open a file. He just looked at me. Ms. Bryant, he said, we checked your bags. We checked your background. You are clean. Then why am I here? I asked. Mr. Price leaned back. He tapped his fingers on the metal table. We received a flag through an automated reporting channel. It was high priority. When that happens, we have to act. Protocol is rigid. I know what protocol is. I said, I also know what a false flag looks like. The paper said, estate interference. That is not a security threat. That is a family dispute. Nolan Price's eyes flickered. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room, then back at me. He lowered his voice, just a fraction. Sometimes, he said, systems are sensitive to external inputs. If a report is filed with enough specific legal coding, it triggers an automatic hold. It looks externally generated, not typical of our usual watch list screenings. He was telling me without telling me. Someone knew exactly which keywords to type into a tip line to trigger a mandatory detention. I missed my flight. Didn't I? I asked. Mister? Price nodded. The plane pushed back 5 minutes ago. I felt the defeat wash over me, heavy and gray. They had won, Diane and Mark, or whoever was pulling their strings, had won. I was stuck in Lake Briar. The hearing would happen without me. So what happens now? I asked. Mr. Price stood up. I am clearing the hold. You are free to go. However, I have to warn you, if this flag was generated by an external party who knows your schedule, it might trigger again if you rebook immediately. He reached into his pocket and slid a business card across the table. On the back, he had written a string of numbers. This is the incident reference number for tonight, he said. If you get stopped again, tell the officer to look up this file. It notes that the search was negative and the threat was unsubstantiated. It should speed things up. Thank you, I said. He paused at the door. Ms. Bryant, someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure you sat in this room tonight. Be careful. I walked out of the room and back into the terminal. The noise of the airport hit me like a physical wave. The announcements, the rolling suitcases, the crying babies, it all seemed so normal, so oblivious to the silent war that had just been declared on me. I found a row of empty seats near a dark gate and sat down. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, trembling exhaustion. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. It was a text message. The number was unknown. No area code that I recognized. I opened it. Stop fighting it. He didn't choose you. The phone almost slipped from my sweating fingers. He didn't choose you. My stomach dropped through the floor. That wasn't just a taunt. It was a quote. I remembered a summer afternoon on the porch with Arthur, years ago. We were talking about his business, about the people who had tried to cheat him over the decades. He had told me, integrity is a choice. Hazel, people get angry when they realize you have it and they don't. They get angry because they know, deep down, that life didn't choose them for the big things. They disqualified themselves. He didn't choose you. Whoever sent this knew that story. Whoever sent this knew the intimate lexicon of my relationship with my grandfather. It meant this wasn't just my parents. My parents didn't listen when Arthur spoke. They only waited for him to stop talking so they could ask for money. This was someone else, someone who had been listening. I stared at the black glass of the departure window. I could see my own reflection, pale and ghost-like against the night. I saw the fear in my eyes, but then I saw something else. I saw the set of my jaw. It was Arthur's jaw. They thought this would break me. They thought that by making me miss the flight, by isolating me in an interrogation room, by sending me cryptic texts, I would crumble. I would do what Diane suggested. I would go home. I would be the good, quiet daughter who didn't cause trouble. They were wrong. I wasn't Hazel the daughter anymore. I was Hazel the analyst, and I had just been handed a data set. The airport detention wasn't an obstacle. It was evidence. The text message wasn't a threat. It was confirmation. They were terrified of me being at that hearing, which meant my presence was worth more than just an inheritance. It was the key to something they were desperate to keep buried. I stood up. The shaking stopped. I wasn't going home. I was going to the ticket counter. I would buy every seat on every flight if I had to. I would drive. I would walk. I was going to Ashford, and I wasn't going to be the victim they expected. I was going to be the witness they feared. I walked back to the ticketing counter with a credit card in my hand and a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. The terminal was quieter now, the late-night lull settling over Cedar Lane International like a heavy blanket. Most of the counters were closed, their lights dimmed, but one agent remained at the premier desk, typing furiously on a keyboard. I approached her, my movements mechanical. I did not feel like a person anymore. I felt like a problem that needed to be solved. I need to book the next flight to Ashford, Virginia. I said. The agent looked up. She had tired eyes and a scarf tied meticulously around her neck. She tapped a few keys, frowning at her screen. The next direct flight isn't until tomorrow afternoon, she said. There is a connection through Chicago leaving at 6 in the morning, but it is nearly sold out. The price is significantly higher than the standard fare. Book it, I said. She hesitated, looking at me. I knew what she saw: a woman in wrinkled business casual, hair slightly frizzy from the humidity, eyes red-rimmed but dry. I looked like someone running away from something, or perhaps running toward a disaster. It will be $2,400, she said softly. One way. I handed her the card. It was my emergency savings, the fund I had built specifically to ensure I never had to ask my father for a cent again. Watching the transaction process felt like watching a piece of my independence burn. But I didn't flinch. Money was a renewable resource, time was not, and my parents were banking on me running out of both. While she printed the boarding pass, I leaned over the counter. I need something else, I said. I need a written statement from the airline confirming that I missed my original flight due to an involuntary detention by airport police. The clerk blinked, her hands pausing over the printer. I am not sure I can provide that, she said. We usually just mark it as a no-show. A no-show implies I chose not to board, I said, keeping my voice level. I did not make that choice. I was prevented from boarding by a security flag that was subsequently cleared. I need a record of that, just a sentence, a timestamp, and a reason. She looked at the line of empty stanchions behind me, then back at my face. She saw the desperation I was trying to hide. Let me see what I can do, she whispered. She typed for a long time. When the printer whirred, she handed me 2 documents. One was my new boarding pass. The other was a printed memo on airline letterhead, stating that passenger Hazel Bryant was unable to board Flight 492 due to a security hold initiated by airport authority, later resolved without incident. Thank you, I said. I meant it more than she could know. This piece of paper was my shield. I found a quiet corner near the charging stations and sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the wall. It was 3 in the morning in Virginia, too early to call a law firm, but I couldn't wait. I needed to leave a paper trail before the sun came up. I dialed the main number for Bramwell and Sutter Legal Group. I expected a voicemail, but after 4 rings, a live answering service picked up. I asked to leave an urgent message for Evan Mercer, the associate attorney listed on the correspondence I had received. Tell him Hazel Bryant is trying to reach him regarding the Arthur Bryant estate hearing. Tell him I have been delayed by an orchestrated interference, but I'm coming. I hung up and closed my eyes for a moment. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a chaotic whiteboard of connections and theories. Why now? Why this specific aggression? My parents had always been manipulative, but this level of tactical precision was new. They were messy people. They left voicemails they regretted. They spent money they didn't have. This airport stunt was clean. It was professional. My phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from a Virginia area code. I answered immediately. This is Hazel, Ms. Bryant. The voice was male. Young, but with a gravitas that suggested he was used to being listened to. This is Evan Mercer. The service patched your message through to my cell. You said interference. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Mr. Mercer, I said, I am currently stuck at Cedar Line International. I was pulled off the security line because of a flag tip accusing me of carrying unauthorized financial instruments. The claim was false. I have been released. But I missed my flight. There was a silence on the other end. Not a shocked silence, a thoughtful one. "Are you safe?" he asked. "I am," I said. "I have rebooked for the morning. But I'm worried about the hearing time. If I'm delayed again, or if the flight is canceled. I might not make the start time. The voicemail said my attendance was required. Strongly recommended," Evan corrected gently. "But yes, effectively required if you want to activate the verification clause." He paused, and I heard the rustle of papers in the background. "Ms. Bryant, I'm going to be frank with you. Your grandfather's estate is complex. Arthur anticipated that there might be difficulties regarding the distribution. He included a presence clause specifically to prevent the estate from being settled quietly in a back room. He wanted witnesses. He wanted me." I said, "He wanted the one person he believed would tell the truth." Evan said, "Listen to me carefully. If you are physically unable to enter the courtroom at the appointed time, we can petition the judge to allow sworn remote testimony, but we need to prove that your absence is involuntary. Judges do not like it when beneficiaries skip court. They like it even less when they think a beneficiary is playing games. I have a memo from the airline." I said, "And I have the incident number from the airport police." "Good," Evan said. "That is excellent. I want you to draft a declaration right now. Email it to me. State the facts clearly. Do not speculate on who sent the tip. Just describe the detention, the specific accusation about financial instruments, and the result. Attach a photo of that airline memo." "I can do that." I said, "Mr. Mercer, does this happen often?" "Family interference?" he asked. "In high-value estates with liquidity issues?" "Yes, but usually it is subtle. Misplacing a notice, forgetting to forward an email, calling in a security threat to an airport is aggressive. It feels desperate." I said, "Desperation makes people dangerous." "Ms. Bryant," Evan said, "but it also makes them sloppy. Get me that declaration. I will file a notice with the court clerk the moment the doors open. We will keep the seat open for you. Just get here." I hung up and immediately opened my email app. My thumbs flew across the screen, drafting the narrative. I kept it clinical. I channeled the part of me that wrote risk assessment reports for mid-sized tech firms. I stripped away the fear and left only the data. At 10:15 post-meridium, I was removed from the screening area. Once the email was sent, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had a lawyer. I had a plan. But I still had 4 hours to kill before boarding. I looked at my banking app. The transaction for the flight was pending at the top of the list. I stared at the balance. It was lower than I liked. My parents had always mocked my obsession with savings. "You live like a monk. Hazel," Diane would say, waving a glass of wine she couldn't afford. "What are you saving for a rainy day?" "No, Mom. I was saving for a hurricane." I tapped the menu and selected the security tab. I wanted to make sure my cards hadn't been compromised during the security check. The airport police hadn't taken my wallet. But paranoia was a cold companion. I saw nothing unusual on the transaction list. But just to be sure, I called the 24-hour support line. The automated system routed me through 3 menus before a human voice came on the line. "Security Department. This is Jason." "Hi, Jason?" I said. "This is Hazel Bryant. I'm traveling and I just want to verify there have been no unusual access attempts on my accounts. I had a security incident at the airport involving a false report about financial instruments, and I am being cautious. Let me take a look." "Ms. Bryant?" Jason said. I heard the clicking of keys. "Transactions look normal," he said. "No failed login attempts on your mobile app. However," my grip tightened on the phone. "However, what I do see a soft inquiry on your credit file from yesterday." Jason said, "It wasn't a credit pull, just an address verification request. Sometimes charities do that if they are updating their donor lists, or if you signed up for a recurring donation. I haven't signed up for anything." I said, "Who was the inquiry from?" "It is listed as the Bryant Civic Fund." Jason said, The name hit me like a physical shove. The Bryant Civic Fund. I closed my eyes, and the memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was 5 years ago, Thanksgiving. the last Thanksgiving I had spent in Ashford before moving west. The dining room table was set with the good china, the silver that Diane insisted on polishing even though the roof was leaking. Mark had been talking about tax strategies. He was always talking about schemes to lower their liability, despite the fact that their income was volatile at best. "We are setting up a community nonprofit," he had said. "Carving the turkey, the Bryant Civic Fund. It is good for the community, and it helps with the estate planning." I had asked what the fund actually did. "Oh, civic engagement," Diane had said vaguely, waving her hand. "Beautification projects, youth outreach, that sort of thing." I had shrugged it off. It sounded like one of their many half-baked ideas that would fizzle out in 6 months. I never saw a flyer. I never saw a website. I assumed it had died on the vine like the organic soap business or the consulting firm for antique rug imports. But it hadn't died. It was active. Active enough to be running address verifications on me the day before my grandfather's hearing. Why would they need to verify my address? They knew where I lived. They sent birthday cards to my apartment in Lake Briar. Unless they weren't verifying it for themselves, unless they were using the fund's credentials to prove to a third party that I lived there, or to prove that I didn't live in Ashford. "Jason," I said, "I did not authorize that inquiry. Can you flag it?" "I can note it on the file." He said, "Do it," I said, "and put a verbal password on my account. No information released to anyone without the phrase, Blue Heron." I hung up. The Bryant Civic Fund. A charity run by my parents, bearing the family name. Digging into my credit report hours before a probate hearing. It smelled of fraud. It smelled of the kind of financial manipulation that Arthur hated more than anything. I needed a second opinion. I needed someone who wasn't related to me by blood or law. I texted Maren Caldwell. "Emergency. I am stuck at Cedar Line. Missed my flight. Police involved. Are you awake?" Maren was an HR manager for a logistics company. She was usually up at 4 in the morning to coordinate with the East Coast teams. Her reply came in 30 seconds. "I am up. I am 10 minutes away. Meet me at the coffee stand outside security in Terminal B." Maren arrived looking like she had stepped out of a magazine, despite the hour. Her trench coat was crisp, her bob sharp. She hugged me, and for the first time since the voicemail, I felt like I might cry. I held it back. "Coffee," Maren said, steering me toward the counter. "Black, 2 shots." We sat at a small round table. I told her everything. The voicemail, the detention, the tip about the financial instruments, the text message about integrity, the Bryant Civic Fund inquiry. Maren listened, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. She didn't interrupt. She processed information like a machine, sorting facts from emotions. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Let's look at this like a termination hearing. When we want to fire someone but we don't have cause. We build a file, we document lateness, we document attitude, we create a narrative of incompetence so that when we pull the trigger, it looks justified." She took a sip of her coffee. "Your parents are building a file on you, Hazel. But why?" I asked. "I don't want their money. I don't even want Arthur's money. Really. I just want to hear what he has to say." "It is not about what you want," Maren said. "It is about what you represent. You are the variable they can't control. If this hearing has a presence clause, that means Arthur set it up as a deadlock. If you don't show, the lock doesn't open. Or it opens a different way," she said darkly. "Think about the accusation. Unauthorized financial instruments. Identity misuse. If you miss the hearing, they won't just say, 'Oh, Hazel couldn't make it.' They will tell the judge, 'Hazel is detained for financial crimes. Hazel is unstable. Hazel cannot be trusted with estate responsibilities. They are trying to disqualify me.'" I whispered, "Exactly." Maren said, "They are trying to impeach your character before you even take the stand. The airport thing wasn't just to delay you, it was to create a police record. Even if you were released, there is an incident report now. They can subpoena that. They can wave it in court and say, 'See where there is smoke, there is fire.'" I felt sick. It was so calculated. It was so cruel. "But why the Civic Fund?" I asked. Why check my address? Marin tapped her manicured nail on the table. Who is the executor, she asked. I don't know, I said. I assumed it was my parents. But Evan mentioned Arthur had protections. If the civic fund is involved, Marin said. My bet is that the fund is a beneficiary, or a creditor. If your parents control the fund, and the fund claims the estate owes it money, she let the sentence hang there. They could drain the estate into the charity. I realized, and since they run the charity, they keep the money, tax-free. And if you are the only one who can stop it, Marin said, then you have to be removed from the board. I checked my phone. It was almost 5. I had to go through security again soon. Check your email. Marin said suddenly, I just did. I sent the declaration. No, Marin said. Check your old emails. From Arthur. If he knew your parents were sharks, he wouldn't have just left a presence clause. He would have left a map. I opened my Gmail. I searched Arthur Bryant. Hundreds of results. Birthday wishes. Links to articles about the economy. Short, dry jokes. I scrolled back. Further back. 6 months ago. A year. Then I saw it. An email from 8 months ago. The subject line was nondescript, reading material. But the preview text caught my eye. If anything happens, read the attachment. I opened it. There was no body text. Just a PDF attachment named T_R_secondary.pdf. I downloaded it. It was a scanned letter, handwritten on Arthur's personal stationery. Hazel, it read, if you are reading this, I am no longer able to manage the accounts. Do not trust the primary ledger. I have moved the secondary file to Trellis and Rowe Private Bank in Ashford. They hold it in safe deposit box 402. You are the only authorized signatory besides myself. Do not let Diane or Mark know this box exists. They believe the only accounts are at the community bank. I showed the screen to Marin. Trellis and Rowe. She said, that is a boutique bank. Very private. Very secure. I need to call them. I said, it is 5 in the morning. Hazel, they have a 24-hour concierge for private clients. I said, I remembered Arthur mentioning it once. Rich people didn't wait for business hours. I found the number for Trellis and Rowe. I dialed. Trellis and Rowe. A woman answered. Her voice was like crushed velvet. My name is Hazel Bryant. I said, I am calling regarding safe deposit box 402. My grandfather, Arthur Bryant, has passed away. I am the authorized signatory. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. The velvet quality vanished from the woman's voice, replaced by a wall of ice. Ms. Bryant, she said, we have been expecting your call. You have? Yes. However, we cannot release any information or confirm any holdings without authorized family verification. I am family. I said, I am his granddaughter. I have a letter from him. We have received instructions that there is an identity dispute regarding the estate, the woman said. Until that is resolved by the executor, all access is frozen. Instructions from whom I demanded. Who told you there is an identity dispute? I cannot comment on client communications. She said, Good day, Ms. Bryant. The line went dead. I looked at Marin. They got there first. I said, They called the bank and told them I am an imposter, or that my identity is compromised. That is why the airport tip mentioned identity documents. It creates a consistent narrative. Marin stood up. She looked angry now. Go, she said. Get on that plane. This isn't a family squabble anymore. Hazel, this is a heist, and you are the security guard they are trying to knock out. I gathered my bag. I hugged Marin hard. Thank you, I said. Kick their ass, she whispered. I walked toward the security checkpoint. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. You will embarrass yourself in court. Don't do it. I stared at the screen. The sender expected me to be hysterical. They expected me to fire back a text screaming, "Who is this?" or "Go to hell." They wanted me to be emotional so they could screenshot it and show the judge. Look, Your Honor, she is unhinged. She is abusive. I didn't type a word. I took a screenshot of the text. Then I blocked the number. I wasn't going to give them any leverage. I was going to give them silence until I gave them evidence. I approached the TSA checkpoint. The line was shorter this time. I walked up to the scanner. I put my phone on the reader. It beeped. Not the happy beep of acceptance, the low, dissonant tone of rejection. The TSA agent frowned. "It says invalid," she said. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Not again. Please, not again. Try it again," I said. "I just bought this ticket." She tried again. "Beep. I'm going to need a supervisor," she said. I looked around, panic rising in my throat like bile. I could see the airport police standing near the podium. If they took me back to that room, I would miss the flight. I would miss the connection. I would miss the hearing. Then, a hand reached over the agent's shoulder. It held a laminate badge. "I have got this." Sharon. It was Nolan Price. He looked fresh, like he had showered and changed in the few hours since I had seen him. Or maybe he just never slept. "Mr. Price," I said, relief washing over me so hard my knees felt weak. "Mrs. Bryant," he said calmly. He typed a code into the agent's terminal. The screen flashed green. "System glitch," he said to the agent. "Override code Alpha 7. Let her through." The agent nodded and waved me forward. Nolan walked with me a few steps past the podium. He kept his voice low. "That wasn't a glitch." "Was it?" I asked. "No," he said. "It was a secondary flag. Lower level, easier to override, but persistent." He reached into his pocket and pulled out another card. This one had a handwritten note on the back. "Take this," he said. "It is the direct line to the airport legal compliance office. If anyone stops you in Chicago, call that number. Tell them reference case B9. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Nolan looked at the busy terminal. "I don't like it when people weaponize my airport," he said. "We are here to stop terrorists, Ms. Bryant, not to help someone win an inheritance dispute." He looked me in the eye. "Someone filed this like they knew your schedule," he said. "They knew exactly when you rebooked. They are watching your reservations." "My parents," I said, "or whoever is helping them." He said, "Go. You have 20 minutes. I ran. I ran past the duty-free shops, past the newsstands, past the smelling salts of cinnamon rolls and burnt coffee. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I reached the gate just as they were calling the final boarding group. I scanned my pass. It beeped green. I walked down the jet bridge, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. "I am coming." I found my seat in the last row, next to the lavatory. It didn't matter. I buckled the belt tight across my lap. I looked out the window at the rain-slicked tarmac. They had tried to stop me with police. They had tried to stop me with shame. They had tried to stop me with fear, but the engines were spooling up. The plane began to move. I wasn't just flying to a hearing, I was flying into a war zone. But this time, I wasn't a child begging for approval. I was the verifying beneficiary, and I was going to arrive before they could finish writing the story without me. Ashford, Virginia, did not smell like the rain-clean air of Oregon. It smelled of old brick, damp leaves, and the kind of heavy, settled humidity that holds history in its suspension. I watched the town blur past the window of my rental car, the colonial facades, the manicured lawns, the aggressive politeness of the architecture. It was a place where reputation was a form of currency, and my parents were currently overdrawn. I checked into a hotel 3 blocks from the courthouse. It was not the kind of place Diane would have stayed. It was a chain hotel, functional and beige, catering to people who were in town for business, not social climbing. I threw my bag on the bed and checked my phone. The notification light was blinking again. Another voicemail from Diane. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and pressed play. I needed to know the temperature of the water before I waded in. "Hazel." Diane's voice quavered. She sounded breathless, as if she had been crying, or perhaps running. "We heard you are in town. Honey, please call us before you go to the lawyer. You are being manipulated. You don't understand the complexities here. We just want to protect you from making a mistake you can't undo. Please, Hazel, trust your parents." The message ended with a wet sniffle. I stared at the phone. The shift in tone was jarring. Last night, at the airport, she had been calm, dismissive, almost bored. She had told me to go home, now that I was here. The strategy had pivoted to victimhood. I was the confused child. They were the protective guardians. The emotional swing felt rehearsed, like a scene she had practiced in the mirror. I didn't call back. I washed my face, pinned my hair back into a tight chignon, and put on the navy blazer I had slept in on the plane. I looked tired, but I looked sharp. I looked like someone who read fine print for a living. Bramwell and Sutter Legal Group was housed in a converted townhouse on a street lined with oak trees. The lobby was hushed, smelling of lemon polish and leather. When I gave my name to the receptionist, her eyebrows shot up. "Ms. Bryant," she said. "We were not sure you would make it." "I am here," I said. She led me back to a conference room that looked like it had been designed to intimidate people into settling out of court. A long mahogany table dominated the space. Seated at the far end was a man who looked younger than I expected. He stood up as I entered. He was wearing a suit that fit too well to be off the rack, but his tie was slightly loosened, suggesting he had been working since dawn. "Hazel Bryant?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You must be Evan Mercer." He offered a hand. His grip was firm, dry, and professional. "I received your email this morning," he said. "The declaration regarding the airport incident has been filed with the court clerk. It is already part of the record." "Thank you," I said. I sat down, placing my phone on the table face down. "So, am I late?" "You are right on time," Evan said. He sat opposite me, opening a thick file. "Let me manage expectations. Ms. Bryant. Tomorrow is not a trial in the cinematic sense. There is no jury. There is no dramatic cross-examination of witnesses in a witness box. It is a probate hearing. It will be just us, the judge, and the other interested parties in a conference room at the courthouse. It is mostly administrative." "Mostly?" I repeated. Evan nodded. "Mostly. However, Arthur's estate is unique." "How so?" "Most people use estate planning to transfer wealth." Evan said, "Arthur used it to transfer information. He created a structure that is highly resistant to standard probate challenges." He slid a document across the table. "Your grandfather did not appoint your parents as executors," Evan said. I looked at the paper. I had assumed, naturally, that Mark and Diane were the executors. They were his only children. That was how it worked in families like ours. You might hate each other, but you kept the control in the bloodline. But the name on the document was not Bryant. It was Holloway Fiduciary Services. "He hired a professional?" I asked. "He did," Evan said. "It is rare for a family estate of this size. Usually, you see corporate fiduciaries for billionaires or people with no living relatives. For Arthur to pay the fees associated with a firm like Holloway implies one thing: he didn't trust the family to follow his instructions." I finished. Evan didn't smile, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. Precisely. He anticipated conflict, and he anticipated that someone might try to leverage emotional pressure to alter the distribution. A corporate executor is immune to guilt trips. I felt a surge of admiration for the old man. Even from the grave, he was outmaneuvering them. Evan turned the page. "This is the core of the hearing," he said. "Arthur established a testamentary trust called the Arthur Bryant Resilience Trust. The assets are not distributed automatically. They are conditional. Conditional on what I asked. Verification of claims and repayment documentation," Evan said. He pointed to a paragraph halfway down the page. "Distributions to the primary beneficiaries, defined as Diane Bryant and Mark Bryant, shall be withheld pending a full audit of outstanding liabilities to the estate. No distribution shall occur until the verifying beneficiary has provided sworn testimony regarding the authenticity of family financial records." I read the line again, and then I saw my name. Hazel Bryant is designated as the verifying beneficiary. My throat tightened. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Does it mean I get the money?" Evan shook his head. "No, it means you hold the keys. Being the verifying beneficiary does not automatically mean you receive the bulk of the estate. It means your attendance and your testimony are the trigger mechanisms. If you show up and confirm that certain records are accurate or inaccurate, the trust releases sealed documents that determine the final split." I sat back, the weight of it settling on my shoulders. He didn't crown me. I whispered. He tasked me. Evan nodded. He made you the safeguard. If you hadn't shown up, or if you had been disqualified, the default clause would have kicked in, and the default clause is much more favorable to the primary beneficiaries because it assumes no fraud has occurred. That is why they tried to stop me. I said, it wasn't just petty spite. If I am not there to verify the fraud becomes the truth, and they get the money, Evan said. The door to the conference room opened. I turned, expecting the receptionist or perhaps a paralegal. Instead, Diane and Mark walked in. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Diane was wearing a black dress that was tasteful, expensive, and completely inappropriate for a morning meeting. She looked like she was dressed for the funeral of a head of state. Mark was in a gray suit that looked slightly too large for him, as if he had shrunk inside it. Hazel Diane cried out. She crossed the room in 3 strides and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of gardenias and desperation. Her arms were tight, constricting. It wasn't a hug of affection. It was a hug of possession. She was claiming me. She was performing the role of the relieved mother for the benefit of the attorney. We were so worried, she said into my hair. When you hung up last night, we didn't know where you were. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides. I did not hug her back. I am fine, Mom, I said. Diane pulled back, holding me at arm's length. Her eyes were wet, but her makeup was perfect. You look tired, she said. Doesn't she look tired? Mark was standing by the door. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wall, at the floor, at his shoes. He looked like a man who was waiting for a bomb to go off. Hello? Hazel? He said. I looked at Evan. He was watching the scene with a neutral expression, but I saw him make a small note on his legal pad. What are you doing here? I asked. Diane laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. We came to support you. Of course we heard you were meeting with Mr. Mercer, and we thought it would be best if we were all on the same page. Families should stick together during these difficult times. She pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. Mark followed, taking the seat next to her. Mr. Mercer, Diane said, turning her charm on Evan. We are just so relieved Hazel made it. She's been under so much stress lately. Her job, it is very demanding. Evan didn't blink. I was just explaining the role of the verifying beneficiary to Ms. Bryant. He said. Mark cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. About that. Mark said. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. Hazel, you need to understand something before tomorrow. Your grandfather, he wasn't himself at the end. Here it comes. I thought, the narrative. He was confused. Mark continued, his voice gaining a little strength. He became very paranoid. He started imagining that people were stealing from him, that we were stealing from him. It was the dementia. You know how he got. Arthur did not have dementia. I said, I spoke to him 2 weeks before he died. He was sharp as a tack. He was doing the New York Times crossword in pen. Mark shook his head sadly. He hid it well. But we were here. Hazel, we saw the decline. He wrote things down that weren't true. He created these tests. It was his illness talking. Diane reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was damp. Honey, she said softly, we just don't want you to be embarrassed. If you go into that hearing and start validating his delusions, you are going to look cruel. You are going to look like you are attacking your own family based on the ramblings of a sick old man. She squeezed my hand. You don't want to be the reason the family gets dragged through the mud. Do you? Diane whispered. It would destroy his legacy. The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was a threat. Be quiet, or you are the villain. I looked at Diane. I looked at the way her eyes darted around the room. Assessing the threat level, I looked at Mark. Crumbling under the weight of his own lies, I pulled my hand away. I have a question. I said. Diane smiled, relieved. Anything. Sweetie, did you contact the airport? I asked. The silence that followed was absolute. Diane's face did something fascinating. It flickered. For a microsecond, less than a heartbeat, Her eyes widened, and her mouth went slack with genuine alarm. It was the look of someone who realizes the safety on the gun is off. Then, the mask slammed back into place. She laughed. It was a loud, incredulous sound. "The airport, Hazel. What are you talking about? Why would we contact the airport?" She looked at Mark. "Did you hear that?" "Mark. She thinks we called the airport." Mark didn't laugh. He just swallowed hard and looked at the table. "No," he mumbled. "We didn't call anyone. I didn't argue. I didn't pull out the incident report or mention the text messages. I didn't need to. I had seen the flicker. It wasn't denial. It was performance. And it was a bad performance." I turned to Evan. "I think we are done here," I said. The door opened again. This time, it was the receptionist. "Ms. Ellison is here," she announced. A woman walked in. She was in her 50s, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like armor. Her hair was gray and cut in a sharp bob. She carried a leather briefcase and an air of absolute authority. She looked at the room, at me, at my parents, at Evan, and assessed the dynamic instantly. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was cool and clear water. "I am Ruth Ellison, from Holloway Fiduciary Services." Diane stood up again, her smile wavering. "Oh, hello. We are Hazel's parents. We were just—" Ruth held up a hand. It was a polite gesture, but it stopped Diane mid-sentence. "Mr. and Mrs. Bryant," Ruth said. "I am afraid this is a scheduled meeting between the executor and the verifying beneficiary. Your presence here is not required, nor is it appropriate at this stage." Diane's smile vanished. "We have a right to be here," Mark said. Finding his voice, "We are the children. You are beneficiaries," Ruth corrected. "And until the verification is complete, you are parties with a conflict of interest. Please excuse us." She didn't shout. She didn't threaten security. She simply stated the reality with such absolute conviction that there was no room for argument. Diane gathered her purse. She looked at me one last time. "Think about what I said." "Hazel," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Don't ruin this." They left. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't tense anymore. It was focused. Ruth sat down at the head of the table. She placed her briefcase in front of her and snapped the locks open. "Ms. Bryant," she said, looking at me. "I apologize for the intrusion. I assumed your parents would be active." "Active is one word for it," I said. Ruth opened a folder. "We need to discuss a procedural matter before the hearing tomorrow." She said, "A filing was submitted to the probate court yesterday afternoon. It was anonymous, but it was formally drafted." "What did it say?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer, it claimed that you are currently under investigation for identity misuse and financial fraud, Ruth said. "It requested that your testimony be excluded on the grounds that your credibility is compromised and that you may be impersonating the real Hazel Bryant to access estate funds." I let out a short, bitter laugh. They really covered all the bases. "It is a standard tactic in contentious estates," Ruth said calmly. "Discredit the witness. If the judge believes there is a cloud over your identity, he might grant a continuance, or he might rule that your verification is unreliable." I reached into my bag. I pulled out the folded piece of paper Nolan Price had given me at the airport. I pulled out the memo from the airline. I pulled out the screenshot of the text message. "He didn't choose you." I slid them across the mahogany table toward Ruth. "This is the incident reference number from Cedar Line International Airport Police," I said. "I was detained last night for 2 hours because of a tip accusing me of carrying unauthorized financial instruments and identity documents. The search was negative. The tip was flagged as malicious interference." Ruth picked up the card. She read the airline memo. She looked at the screenshot. She didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She nodded, a slow, precise movement. "The timing aligns," she said. "The anonymous filing was submitted 3 hours before your flight was scheduled to depart. They wanted the court record to match the police record. They wanted a paper trail." I said. Ruth looked at me. Her expression softened. "Just a fraction." "Your grandfather told me you were smart," she said. "He said you were the only one who paid attention to the details. He taught me." I said, "This is helpful," Ruth said, placing the documents into her file. "Extremely helpful. It establishes a pattern of interference. It suggests that the anonymous filing is not a whistleblower action, but a tactical strike to prevent the administration of the estate." She looked at Evan. "We will present this tomorrow. First thing." Ruth turned back to me. "Ms. Bryant, you need to understand what you are walking into. This estate isn't just about money. Arthur built a machine. He built a trap. He knew that if he simply left the money to you, they would sue you for a decade. They would bleed you dry with legal fees. So he did this instead." I said, "Yes," Ruth said. "He left the money to the trust, and he made the trust conditional on the truth. If they want the money, they have to let you speak. If they stop you from speaking, they get nothing. He forced them to choose between their greed and their secrets, and they are trying to find a third option." I said, "Where they keep the secrets and get the money." "Exactly," Ruth said. "That is what the airport was about. That is what the gaslighting is about. They are desperate to find a way to bypass the lock." She closed the file. "Get some rest. Ms. Bryant, tomorrow is going to be a long day." I walked back to the hotel in the late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the brick sidewalks of Ashford. I felt exposed. I felt like every car that passed might be Mark, watching. I felt like every person on the street might be someone they had hired. I locked the door to my hotel room and engaged the deadbolt. I put the chair under the handle. It was paranoid, maybe, but I wasn't taking chances. I ordered room service a club sandwich I didn't eat and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. I felt incredibly alone. The weight of the task was crushing. I wasn't just fighting my parents. I was dismantling the entire structure of my family. If I testified tomorrow, if I verified the fraud, I was effectively orphaning myself. There would be no Christmas dinners, no birthday calls, no pretending. I would be the one who broke the family. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my saved voicemails. I had kept them for years, transferring them from phone to phone. I found one from 2 years ago. It was just a check-in. "Hazel, it's Arthur." The voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded raspy, warm, familiar. "I was just reading about that market correction in the tech sector. Hope you're keeping your head down. Don't let the panic get to you. You know what I always say? The numbers don't lie. Only the people counting them do." He chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. "Listen, kid, I know it is hard out there. I know you feel like you are swimming upstream. But remember, people who fear daylight will always try to break the lamp. Don't let them break you. You are the lamp. Hazel, you are the only light in the house." I played it again. "People who fear daylight will always try to break the lamp." I sat in the dark hotel room, the tears finally coming. They were hot and fast. He knew. He had known for years. He knew they were stealing from him. He knew they were liars. And he knew that one day, he would be gone, and I would be the only thing standing between them and the erasure of everything he had built. He hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me a fight. But as the recording ended, I realized something else. He hadn't just left me a fight. He had believed I could win it. He didn't choose Diane. He didn't choose Mark. He chose me. I wiped my face. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the red eyes, the pale skin. I am the lamp. I whispered to the empty room. And tomorrow, I was going to turn the lights on. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Ashford was a bruised purple, heavy with unspent rain. The humidity had returned, turning the air into a physical weight that pressed against the windows of my rental car. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, watching the entrance of the Ashford Probate Court. It was an imposing brick building with white pillars that looked like they were designed to make human beings feel small and temporary. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had pinned my hair back so tight it pulled at my scalp. I wore a charcoal sheath dress and a blazer that cost more than my first car. I wore no jewelry except for a small watch. I looked like a fortress. I looked like someone who could not be rattled by cryptic texts or airport interrogations. But inside, my stomach was a knot of cold dread. I felt like I was walking into a play where everyone else had the script, and I was just a prop to be moved around the stage. I forced myself to open the door. The air smelled of wet asphalt and legal fees. I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic warning. As I reached the landing, I stopped. Standing in the shadow of a pillar, away from the main doors, were my parents. They were not alone. They were speaking with a man I did not recognize. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit that was too fashionable for a probate court in Virginia. It was a midnight blue cut that screamed European tailoring. He was leaning in close to Mark, speaking in a low, rapid murmur. Diane was nodding, her hands twisting a tissue into a white pulp. I stepped behind a large stone planter, observing. The analyst in me took over. Who was this man? He wasn't their usual family attorney. A kindly, incompetent man named Mr. Henderson who handled their traffic tickets. This man looked like a shark who had learned to walk. As I watched, the man handed Mark a thick envelope. Mark took it and shoved it quickly into the inside pocket of his jacket. The man patted Mark on the shoulder, not a gesture of comfort, but of instruction. Then he turned and walked briskly toward the parking lot, checking his phone. I memorized his face. Sharp nose, graying temples, eyes that looked like they calculated interest rates in their sleep. I waited until he was gone before I stepped out. Hazel Diane's voice was high and brittle. She spotted me and immediately composed her face into a mask of tragic dignity. "We were looking for you. We saved you a seat." "I don't need a seat," I said, walking past them. "I have counsel." Mark looked pale. He looked like a man who was holding his breath underwater. He didn't say anything, but his hand moved instinctively to his chest, guarding the pocket where he had hidden the envelope. We walked through the metal detectors in silence. The air inside the courthouse was cool and smelled of floor wax. We took the elevator to the third floor, where the probate division was housed. This wasn't a courtroom from television. There was no gallery, no jury box. It was a large conference room with wood-paneled walls and a long, polished table. At the head of the table sat Judge Vance, a woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked like she had heard every lie ever told in the state of Virginia and was impressed by none of them. Evan Mercer was already there, sitting on the right side of the table. He stood when I entered. "Good morning, Ms. Bryant," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," I said. I sat next to him, across from us. My parents took their seats. They looked small against the heavy furniture. Next to them sat a man I recognized from the hallway, not the shark, but a local attorney I vaguely knew. A man named Lyle Varon. I leaned toward Evan. "Who is that?" I whispered. "Lyle Varon," Evan whispered back. "He usually represents corporate interests. He is listed here as outside counsel for the estate's banking partners, specifically Trellis and Rowe." My blood ran cold. The man in the hallway hadn't been Varon, but Varon was here representing the bank where the secret box was kept. The connection was too neat. My parents, the bank, and this high-powered attorney sitting on their side of the table. Judge Vance cleared her throat. The sound was like a gavel strike. "We are here for the probate hearing of the estate of Arthur Bryant," she said. "The court notes the presence of the interim executor, Ruth Ellison of Holloway Fiduciary Services. The court notes the presence of the primary beneficiaries, Mark and Diane Bryant, and the court notes the presence of the potential verifying beneficiary, Hazel Bryant." She looked at me over her glasses. Her gaze was penetrating. "Ms. Bryant, your attendance was a matter of some speculation in the filings yesterday." I kept my posture neutral, hands folded on the table, shoulders back. "I am here, Your Honor," I said. Judge Vance nodded. She opened a thick file in front of her. "Let us begin with the inventory. Mr. Bryant left an estate with a complex asset structure. We have liquid holdings in the amount of $400,000. We have real estate holdings valued at $1.2 million, and we have a significant portfolio of private banking instruments held at Trellis and Rowe, the value of which is currently sealed pending verification." She turned a page. "However, She continued. The distribution of these assets is not straightforward. Mr. Bryant's will stipulates that all distributions are paused pending the verification of certain debts and charitable pledges. Specifically, pledges made to an organization known as the Bryant Civic Fund. At the mention of the fund, I saw Diane's hands spasm. She clasped them together tightly, her knuckles turning white. She stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy. Ruth Ellison stood up. She looked calm, professional, and dangerous. Your Honor, she said, before we proceed to the asset verification, we must address the preliminary motion filed yesterday regarding the standing of Ms. Hazel Bryant. Judge Vance nodded. The anonymous filing, she said, the one claiming Ms. Bryant is under investigation for identity fraud. Yes, Your Honor. Ruth said, this filing alleges that the woman sitting here is either an imposter or is currently compromised by legal action that would render her testimony unreliable. It requests that she be excluded from the verification process. Lyle Varon leaned forward. His voice was smooth, like oil. Your Honor, if I may, he said, while my client, Trellis and Rowe, did not file this motion, we do share the concern. We have a duty to protect the assets. If there is any doubt about the beneficiary's legal status or identity, we must err on the side of caution. We support the exclusion. Of course they did. If I was excluded, the box stayed shut. Evan stood up. He didn't look at Varon. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, this filing is a fabrication. It is a tactical delay designed to prevent my client from testifying. We have evidence that this narrative of identity fraud was manufactured within the last 24 hours to coincide with Ms. Bryant's travel schedule. He handed a folder to the bailiff, who walked it to the judge. Inside that folder, Evan said, you will find a sworn declaration from Ms. Bryant. You will also find an incident report from the Cedar Line International Airport Police and a memo from the airline. Ms. Bryant was detained last night based on a false tip using the exact same language as the court filing. The police found nothing. The tip was flagged as malicious interference. Judge Vance opened the folder. The room was silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear Mark's shallow breathing across the table. The judge read the documents. She read them slowly. Then she looked up at Varon. Mr. Varon, she said, were you aware that the subject of this identity investigation was detained and released without charge 12 hours ago? Varon didn't flinch. I was not. Your Honor, as I said, we did not file the motion. Judge Vance turned to me. Ms. Bryant, she said, do you swear that the statement in this declaration is true? I stood up. My legs felt steady. I do, Your Honor. I said. The judge looked at me. You may speak. Ms. Bryant, if you have anything to add to the record regarding your arrival here, do so now. I took a breath. This was it. I had to thread the needle. I couldn't sound angry. I couldn't sound like a daughter with a grudge. I had to sound like a witness. Your Honor, I said. My voice was clear. I arrived in Ashford late last night after rebooking a flight that I was forced to miss. The tip called into the airport police accused me of carrying unauthorized financial instruments. It was designed to trigger a specific legal flag. I paused, letting the words sink in. While I was detained, I received text messages from an unknown number warning me not to come to this hearing. One message used a phrase specific to my grandfather's personal history. These were not random acts. They were coordinated attempts to prevent me from entering this room. I looked at my parents. Diane was staring at the table. Mark was looking at Varon. I am not asking the court to assign blame at this moment. I continued. I am simply asking the court to recognize that there is an active effort to suppress my testimony, and I request that the court issue a preservation order for all communications regarding the anonymous filing. Judge Vance looked at Varon. She looked at my parents. Her expression had hardened. The motion to exclude Ms. Bryant is denied, she said. Her identity is verified by her presence and her sworn statement. The court orders the immediate preservation of all metadata and origin logs associated with the anonymous submission. If we find that a party in this room filed it, there will be sanctions. She closed the file with a snap. Ms. Ellison, she said to Ruth, since Ms. Bryant is present and verified, you may proceed with the instructions for sealed packet B. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sealed packet B, the weapon Arthur had buried. Ruth opened her briefcase. She took out a heavy, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. It looked archaic, almost theatrical, but the silence it commanded was real. Mr. Bryant left specific instructions. Ruth said, this packet was only to be opened if Hazel Bryant appeared in person to verify her identity. If she had not appeared, this packet would have been destroyed, and the default distribution would have proceeded. She picked up a letter opener. Diane made a small, strangled sound. Please, she whispered. Ruth didn't stop. She slit the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. She pulled out a stack of documents and a small black USB drive. She handed the first document to the judge. This is a ledger, Ruth said. It details a series of personal loans made by Arthur Bryant to Mark and Diane Bryant over the last 15 years. Judge Vance put on her glasses. She ran her finger down the column of numbers. The total is significant, the judge said. It is, Ruth said. But the ledger is not the primary issue. The primary issue is the addendum attached to the final loan. She handed a second document to the judge. 6 years ago, Ruth said, her voice devoid of emotion, Arthur Bryant paid off a debt of $450,000 to a private creditor. This debt was incurred by Mark and Diane Bryant. The creditor was threatening foreclosure on their primary residence. I felt a shockwave go through me. $450,000. That was the year they had told me they were downsizing because they wanted a simpler life. They hadn't been downsizing. They had been drowning. Arthur paid the debt in full. Ruth continued, but he attached a condition, a contractual condition signed by both Mark and Diane Bryant. Ruth picked up the document and read from it. In exchange for this relief, Mark and Diane Bryant agreed to never again utilize the name, credit, or identity of Hazel Bryant for any financial application, loan, or charitable instrument. Any violation of this clause will result in the immediate forfeiture of their claim to the residuary estate. I stared at my parents. They had signed it. They had promised. Arthur knew. I realized. He knew they had used my name before. That was why he had protected me. That was why he had sent me to college out of state. He wasn't just paying for my education. He was paying for my escape. Ruth picked up the third document. It was a memorandum. This is a summary of findings regarding the Bryant Civic Fund. Ruth said, it appears that within 6 months of signing that agreement, a credit line was opened in the name of the Bryant Civic Fund. The guarantor listed on the application was not Mark Bryant. It was Hazel Bryant. The room spun. I stood up. I couldn't help it. What I said. My voice wasn't neutral anymore. You used my name. Diane burst into tears. It wasn't a soft weep. It was a loud, ugly sobbing. We had to, she wailed. She looked at the judge, her mascara running. Your Honor, you don't understand. The business was failing. We needed bridge capital. The bank wouldn't look at us because of the foreclosure risk. We didn't spend the money. We just used her credit score to secure the line. It was for the family. Sit down. Ms. Bryant, Judge Vance said to me. Her voice was sharp, but her eyes were sympathetic. I sat down, my hands trembling. They had stolen my identity. 6 years ago, while I was working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst, eating ramen and saving every penny, they were leveraging my credit rating to float their failed lifestyle. Mark finally spoke. His voice was bitter, scraping against the silence. He set us up, Mark said. He glared at the empty chair where Arthur would have sat. Your grandfather. He liked playing hero. He liked dangling the money. He knew we would trip. He waited for it. He set you up, I repeated, incredulous. He paid off your house. Dad, he gave you $500,000 and asked for one thing. He asked you to leave me alone. We couldn't, Mark snapped. He slammed his hand on the table. You were the only one with clean credit. Hazel, What were we supposed to do? Lose everything? Hazel hears the subtext. They believe need excuses everything. Their desperation was a license to cannibalize their own child. Lyle Varon stood up smoothly. Your Honor, he said. While these family dynamics are touching, they are irrelevant to the banking structure. The Bryant Civic Fund is a legitimate entity. If there are disputes about guarantors, that is a matter for civil court, not probate. My client, Trellis and Rowe, holds the assets of the estate. We object to the introduction of this memorandum as hearsay. It is an unverified allegation. Evan was on his feet instantly. It is not hearsay. Evan argued, it is a document from the testator, supported by the signed contract you are holding, and it directly impacts the distribution. If the beneficiaries violated the condition, they are disqualified. That means the assets at Trellis and Rowe do not belong to them. They belong to the trust, and we need discovery, Evan continued, his voice rising. We need full access to the Bryant Civic Fund records and the internal compliance logs of Trellis and Rowe. We believe the fund was used as a funnel to pay personal debts using the proceeds of loans taken out in my client's name. Defamation, Varon barked. He wasn't smooth anymore. He was aggressive. This is a fishing expedition. Trellis and Rowe has strict privacy protocols. You cannot simply demand we open our books because of a family argument. Judge Vance took off her glasses. She looked at Varon. She looked at the sobbing Diane. She looked at the bitter Mark. Then she looked at me. This court is now alert to tampering, she said softly. She picked up her gavel. The objection is overruled. Judge Vance said, Mr. Mercer, your request for discovery is granted. I am ordering a full forensic accounting of the Bryant Civic Fund and its relationship with Trellis and Rowe. Varon opened his mouth to protest, but the judge cut him off. Furthermore, she said, her voice like iron, I am issuing an interim order. Effective immediately, all assets of the Arthur Bryant estate, including those held in private banking and those accessible by the Bryant Civic Fund, are frozen. No beneficiary, no trustee, and no officer of the bank may move, liquidate, or encumber any asset until this investigation is complete. She looked at Mark. Mr. Bryant, if I find that you have moved a single cent since the date of death, I will hold you in contempt. Mark paled. He slumped back in his chair. The hearing is continued for 2 weeks, Judge Vance said. She banged the gavel. The sound echoed in the room. I sat there, frozen. I watched Ruth pack the documents back into the envelope. I watched Varon whisper furiously to Mark. I watched Diane wipe her face, her expression shifting from sorrow to a cold, hard anger as she looked at me. I realized then what had happened. They hadn't just been trying to keep me away to hide the past. They had been trying to keep me away because there was money in the accounts right now. Money they were trying to move. Money they were trying to hide before the freeze order came down. I hadn't just verified a will. I had stopped a robbery in progress. Evan touched my arm. Hazel, he said, are you okay? I looked at him. I felt lightheaded, but clarity was cutting through the fog. I stopped them. I said, yes, Evan said. You did. Diane stood up. She walked over to where I was sitting. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. You think you won, she whispered. You think you are so smart with your airport receipts and your lawyers. She straightened up, smoothing her dress. You have no idea what you just started. Hazel, you really don't. She turned and walked out, Mark trailing behind her like a ghost. Varon packed his briefcase and followed them, not sparing me a glance. I watched the door close. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Diane was right. I hadn't won. I had just fired the first shot in a war I didn't know I was fighting. Ruth walked over to me. She handed me a copy of the interim order. Keep this with you, she said. It is your shield. I took the paper. What happens now? I asked. Now, Ruth said. We opened the box at the bank. The judge gave us the authority. Whatever is in there, it is going to tell us the rest of the story. I looked at the window. The rain had started again, lashing against the glass. I thought about the debt. $450,000. They had sold me for a house. They had sold my future to keep their facade. I stood up. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a cold, hard resolve left. "Let's go to the bank," I said. Evan looked at his watch. "Now?" he asked. "Right now," I said, "before Varen finds a way to lock us out." I walked out of the courthouse, into the rain. I was verifying beneficiary Hazel Bryant, and I was done being the victim. The rain in Ashford had turned into a relentless, rhythmic drumming against the roof of my rental car. I sat in the driver's seat outside the courthouse, the engine idling, watching the wipers slice back and forth. The adrenaline from the hearing was beginning to metabolize into a shaky, exhausted crash. I had stood up, I had spoken, I had stopped the money from moving, but I did not feel like a victor. I felt like someone who had just pulled the pin on a grenade in a crowded room. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a name I didn't expect to see. Nolan Price. I picked it up immediately. "This is Hazel," I said. "Ms. Bryant," Nolan said. His voice was clipped, professional, but tight with irritation. "I'm calling to inform you of a security incident regarding your file." My hand tightened on the wheel. "What kind of incident?" I asked. "About 20 minutes ago, we received a formal request for the release of the incident report and all surveillance footage from your detention last night," Nolan said. "The request came from an email address claiming to be authorized by the Hazel Bryant estate representative. It included a digital signature that looked like yours." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I did not authorize that," I said. "I haven't signed anything. I figured as much." Nolan said, "The request form was outdated. It referenced a statute that was repealed last year. Someone is working off old legal templates." I denied the request and flagged the email domain. "Thank you." "Nolan," I said, "did you trace it?" "It routed through a VPN," he said, "but the recovery email address was linked to a server hosted by a local firm called Sablebrook Consulting." Sablebrook. I had heard that name recently, or seen it. "I am locking the file down." "Ms. Bryant," Nolan continued, "it will require a court order to open it now. But you need to know they aren't just trying to hide what happened. They are trying to delete it. If they get that footage, they will edit it or destroy it. They are scared." I said. "They are desperate," Nolan corrected. "And desperate people make mistakes. Stay safe, Ms. Bryant." The line went dead. I drove to the offices of Holloway Fiduciary Services in a daze. The city of Ashford looked different now. It wasn't just a collection of colonial buildings and coffee shops. It was a grid of traps. Ruth Ellison's office was a sanctuary of dark wood and silence. Evan met me in the lobby, looking energized by the morning's victory, but his expression sobered when he saw my face. We went into Ruth's private office. She was waiting for us, a fresh pot of tea on the table and the heavy estate binder open in front of her. "Sit down, Hazel," Ruth said. I sat. I told them about Nolan's call. I told them about the fake signature and Sablebrook Consulting. Ruth nodded slowly, as if this confirmed a theory she had already constructed. "It fits the pattern," she said. "They are trying to scrub the record before the forensic accounting begins." She tapped the open binder. "We need to talk about the structure of the Arthur Bryant Resilience Trust." Ruth said, "You need to understand what you are really fighting for, because it is not just about stopping your parents from stealing. It is about where the money goes if they are disqualified." I assumed it would go to the next of kin. I said, "Or back into the pot." "No," Ruth said. "Arthur was very specific. He wanted this money to do good work, real work. If the primary beneficiaries, your parents, are found to be compliant and honest, the trust distributes income to them for their lifetime." She paused, looking me in the eye. "But if they are found to have engaged in fraud, interference, or the misuse of family assets, they are disqualified. And the entire corpus of the trust, nearly $2 million in liquid and real estate assets, redirects immediately to a specific grant." "What grant?" I asked. "The Gateway Housing Initiative," Ruth said. "It is a program that provides down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers who have survived financial abuse. Arthur set it up quietly years ago. He wanted to help people who were trying to escape exactly the kind of trap he saw you in. I felt a lump form in my throat. Arthur hadn't just protected me. He had tried to build a lifeboat for everyone else like me. So if I verify the fraud, I said, the money doesn't go to me. It goes to the housing grant. Correct, Ruth said. You receive a standard trustee fee for your time, but the inheritance goes to the community. I looked at my hands. This changed everything. If I pursued this, if I nailed my parents to the wall with their own lies, I wasn't just taking money out of their pockets. I was actively giving it away to strangers. They will hate me, I whispered. They will say I stole their legacy to give it to charity. They will say I did it out of spite. Ruth didn't answer. She let the silence hang there. Evan leaned forward. His voice was low and steady. Hazel, he said, they are already saying that. They are already rewriting the story to make you the villain. But they are my parents, I said. The words tasted like ash. I know what they are. I know what they did. But if I do this, if I finish this, I am the one pushing the button. I am the one destroying the family. I looked at Evan, pleading for him to tell me I was wrong. Evan looked back at me with a gaze that was entirely devoid of judgment, but heavy with truth. Hazel, he said, a family that requires your silence isn't asking for love. It's asking for cover. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It's asking for cover. I thought about the airport detention. I thought about the credit line opened in my name. I thought about Diane's rehearsed tears and Mark's bitter whispers. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an accomplice. They wanted a co-conspirator who would help them bury the bodies of their financial mistakes. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt cleaner, sharper. Okay, I said. Let's get the records. I spent the next 3 hours in the hotel business center, treating the investigation like a job. I was not Hazel the daughter. I was Hazel the analyst. I started with the Bryant Civic Fund. It was registered as a nonprofit organization, but the filings were sparse. The stated mission was vague community development and financial literacy. The irony was sharp enough to cut. I pulled the tax filings from the last 3 years. The revenue was inconsistent, mostly small donations, but the expenses were heavy. Huge chunks of money were flowing out to a single vendor, Sablebrook Consulting, administrative fees, strategic planning, consulting retainers. I looked up Sablebrook Consulting. No website, no LinkedIn profile, no board of directors, just a registration address in a strip mall on the outskirts of Ashford. I needed verification. I called Marin. I know you are at work, I said when she answered, but I need you to run an address for me. Send it. Marin said. I text her the address for Sablebrook. 2 minutes later, she called back. It is a mailbox store. Hazel, Marin said. The pack and ship on Route 9, box number 300. So Sablebrook is a shell. I said, a classic shell. Marin agreed. They move money from the Civic Fund to Sablebrook as a business expense, and then Sablebrook withdraws it or transfers it to a personal account. It is tax fraud. Hazel, an embezzlement. And that is where the family authorization email came from. I said, they are running the cover-up from the same shell company they used to steal the money. They are sloppy, Marin said. Or they are just arrogant. Both, I said. I hung up. I had the connection. The Civic Fund was the engine. Sablebrook was the exhaust pipe, and my parents were driving the car. But I needed one more thing. I needed to bridge the gap between the airport tip and the family. I needed permission to subpoena the phone records that would prove Diane or Mark called the tip line. The judge had preserved the records, but to access them quickly, without a months-long fight, I needed a waiver. I texted Diane, meet me at Westmere Plaza Cafe. 4 o'clock. Just us. If you bring a lawyer. I leave. She replied instantly, we will be there. Westmere Plaza was neutral ground. It was an open-air mall with fountains and overpriced coffee shops. It was public. It was safe. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table outside, visible from the street. I ordered a black coffee and waited. They arrived together, walking in that synchronized, huddled way they always did when they were under siege. Diane wore sunglasses, though it was overcast. Mark looked like he hadn't slept in a week. They sat down. Diane took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. "Hazel," she said, "I am glad you called. We need to stop this madness before it goes any further." I didn't smile. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "This is a limited waiver." I said, "It grants my attorney permission to subpoena the call logs and metadata associated with the anonymous tip filed to the airport police and the anonymous motion filed with the probate court." Mark stared at the paper like it was radioactive. "Why would we sign that?" he asked. "Because if you didn't do it," I said, "this clears you. If it was a stranger, or a confused bank employee, or a clerical error, this proves it. And if we don't sign," Diane asked, her voice hard, "then I petition the court for a hostile subpoena." I said, "It will take longer. But when I get the records, and I will get them, I will ask the judge to charge you with perjury and obstruction of justice." Diane let out a sharp, incredulous breath. "Perjury. You would send your own parents to jail. I am giving you a chance to tell the truth." I said, "Sign the waiver. Let's see who made the call." Diane leaned forward. She reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. "Hazel," she said, her voice trembling with that weaponized emotion I knew so well. "After everything we did for you, we paid for your piano lessons. We sent you to private school. We gave you a good life. How can you be so cold?" I looked at her. I saw the manipulation. I saw the transactional view of love. "You did things I didn't ask for," I said calmly. "You sent me to private school because you wanted to brag to the neighbors. You paid for piano lessons because you wanted a performer at your dinner parties." I leaned in. "And then you invoiced me emotionally." I said, "You kept a tally. And every time you needed money, every time you needed a signature, you pulled out that invoice and told me I owed you." Mark's face hardened. The sad, defeated father vanished, replaced by the angry, entitled man I remembered from my childhood. "You are ungrateful," he spat. "You think you are better than us because you have a corporate job and a savings account. You have no idea what it takes to keep a family afloat." "I know exactly what it takes." I said, "It takes honesty, and you went bankrupt on that years ago." Mark stood up. He knocked the table, spilling my coffee. "You will regret this," he said. "You are going to humiliate us in front of the whole town. And for what? For a dead man's money, for the truth." I said. Mark sneered. "Truth doesn't pay the mortgage." "Hazel." He grabbed Diane's arm. "Come on," he said. "She isn't going to sign anything. She wants a war." They walked away. Diane looked back once, her face twisted in a mixture of fear and fury. I sat there, watching the coffee drip onto the pavement. I hadn't gotten the signature, but I had gotten the answer. They were guilty, and they were terrified. My phone rang. It was Evan. "Hazel, where are you?" he asked. "Westmere Plaza." I said, "What is it?" "We just got an email from Trellis and Rowe." Evan said, "From the Office of the General Counsel. They are offering a private resolution meeting. Tonight, 5 o'clock. A resolution I asked. They want to settle." Evan said, "They are proposing a guaranteed cash distribution to you, outside of the trust framework, in exchange for a universal release of claims and a confidentiality agreement. They want to buy me off." I said, "Yes," Evan said, "and they want to do it before we open that box tomorrow." I looked at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. "Take the meeting," I said. We met at the Trellis and Rowe offices in downtown Ashford. It was a glass tower that looked down on the rest of the city. The conference room was on the top floor, with a view of the river. Lyle Varon was there. So was a woman introduced as the Senior Vice President of Risk Management. And to my surprise, a man in a gray suit who didn't introduce himself at all. He just sat in the corner, taking notes. "Ms. Bryant?" Lyle Varon said. He was back to being smooth, charming. "We appreciate you coming on such short notice. We believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the estate, and we want to rectify it." He slid a packet across the polished table. "We are prepared to offer you an immediate distribution of $250,000. Varon said, "This is separate from any trust allocation. It is a..." goodwill gesture from the bank to ensure family harmony, and the conditions Evan asked. Not touching the packet, Varun smiled. Standard language. Ms. Bryant agrees to withdraw her motion for discovery. She agrees to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the internal operations of the bank and the Bryant Civic Fund, and he flipped to the last page of the packet. She agrees to sign this joint statement. I looked at the page. It was a press release. Hazel Bryant withdraws her claims of interference, acknowledging that the incident at Cedar Line Airport was a misunderstanding due to personal stress and exhaustion. The family is united in their grief. I stared at the words. Personal stress. Misunderstanding. They weren't just buying my silence. They were buying my reality. They wanted me to sign a document that said I was crazy, that I was weak, that I had imagined the police. The tips, the threat. I looked up at the senior vice president. You want me to lie? I said, we want to protect the family's reputation, she said smoothly, and the bank's privacy. Litigation is messy. Ms. Bryant, this is a clean break. I looked at Varun. He looked smug. He thought he had won. He thought everyone had a price, and $250,000 was a good price for a financial analyst. I looked at Evan. He gave a microscopic shake of his head. He knew. I closed the folder. No, I said. Varun blinked. Excuse me, I said no. I repeated. I am not signing this. I am not withdrawing my motion. And I am certainly not signing a statement that blames my own sanity for a crime committed against me. Ms. Bryant, Varun said, his voice dropping an octave. You should consider the alternative. If you proceed, we will fight the discovery. We will drag this out for years. The legal fees alone will bankrupt the estate. Then we will bankrupt it. I said, I don't care about the money. I stood up. I care about the record. I said, and the record will show that you tried to bribe a witness to cover up a felony. I looked at the man in the corner. Make sure you write that down. I said. I walked out. Evan followed me, grabbing his briefcase, in the elevator. Evan let out a long breath. That was intense. He said, they are terrified. Evan, I said, they aren't protecting the family. They are protecting a system. The bank is involved. They knew about the civic fund fraud. They let it happen because the fees were good. That is why Varun is here. We walked out of the building into the cooling evening. The rain had stopped. Leaving the streets slick and black, I stopped on the sidewalk. Across the street, parked in a loading zone, was a silver sedan. It was my parents' car. Diane wasn't inside, but Mark was. He was sitting in the driver's seat. The window rolled up. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the traffic. He was looking at me. His face was a pale oval in the gloom. He didn't wave. He didn't scowl. He just watched. It was a look of pure, unadulterated surveillance. It was the look of a man who realized that his property, his daughter had walked off the lot, and he didn't know how to get her back. He is watching, I whispered. Evan looked. Don't engage, he said. Let's get you to the hotel. I realized then that this wasn't about love. It wasn't even about the money. Really, it was about control. Mark couldn't stand the fact that the narrative was slipping away from him. He couldn't stand that I was writing my own ending. We got into Evan's car. As we pulled away, I watched Mark in the side mirror. He didn't follow. He just sat there, a ghost haunting his own life. Back at the hotel, I felt a strange sense of finality. The bridges were burned. The settlement was rejected. The war was total. I sat on the bed and opened my purse. I took out the small, heavy object Ruth had given me after the meeting this morning. It was the digital key to the secondary file, the one Arthur had left in the box. Ruth had authorized me to open it tonight. She said I needed to know the whole truth before the final hearing. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. There was only one file, an audio file. I put in my earbuds. I clicked play. There was a hiss of static, and then Arthur's voice filled my head. It sounded closer than the voicemails, more intimate. Hazel, he said. If you are listening to this, then you did it. You stood up. You verified. He coughed. A wet, rattling sound. I am recording this because I know your parents will tell you lies. They will tell you that I was confused. They will tell you that I didn't love them. They will tell you that I chose you because I wanted to punish them. A pause. That isn't true. I loved them. God help me. I loved them enough to pay their debts a dozen times over. But love isn't a line of credit. Hazel, and at some point, you have to stop funding the things that are killing the people you love. I closed my eyes. Tears leaked out, hot and fast. I didn't choose you because you were the smartest, Arthur said. I didn't choose you because you were the toughest. I chose you because in 33 years, you are the only one who never asked me for money. You only ever asked me for time. I sobbed. A single, wrenching sound. I remembered the summers on the porch, the crossword puzzles, the quiet. You wanted to know me, Arthur said. They only wanted to know what I had. That is why you are the safeguard, because you know the value of things, not just the price. Finish it, Hazel, he whispered. Turn on the lights, and then walk away. Build your own house. Don't live in the ruins of mine. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of the hotel room. You only ever asked me for time. He had seen me, all those years, when I thought I was invisible. When I thought I was the disappointment. He had been watching. He had seen the truth. I wiped my face. I unplugged the drive. I wasn't afraid of Mark watching from his car anymore. I wasn't afraid of Varun and his threats. I had Arthur's voice in my ear. I had the truth in my hands. Tomorrow, the box would open, and I was going to turn on every single light in the house. The air in the Ashford probate court had changed since the last session, 2 weeks ago. It had been heavy with humidity and unspoken tension. Today, the air was thin, brittle, and cold. It smelled of ozone, like the moments before a lightning strike. I sat next to Evan Mercer. My hands were folded on the table, resting on top of a thick stack of printed emails and bank records. I wore a white blouse and black trousers. No blazer today. I didn't need the armor anymore. I felt stripped down, essential, like a wire carrying a live current, across the table. My parents looked like ghosts of the people they had been. Diane was pale, her eyes rimmed with red, her hands twisting a silk scarf into a tight, fraying rope. Mark stared at the table, his jaw set in a rigid line of defiance that looked increasingly fragile. Lyle Varun sat beside them, but he had distanced his chair by a few inches, a subtle physical separation that spoke volumes about his confidence in their case. Judge Vance entered. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at the attorneys. She sat down, opened the file, and adjusted her glasses. Her movements were precise and angry. We are back on the record in the matter of the estate of Arthur Bryant, she said. She picked up a document from the top of the pile. At the conclusion of our last session, this court ordered a forensic accounting of the Bryant Civic Fund and its relationship to an entity known as Sablebrook Consulting. That report has been submitted by the independent auditor. The judge looked up, her eyes locked on Lyle Varun. Mr. Varun, the findings are not ambiguous. Varun cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth but wary. We maintain that Trellis and Rowe acted in accordance with standard privacy protocols. Standard protocols do not involve funneling estate assets into a shell company managed by a mailbox store. Judge Vance snapped. She held up the report. The inquiry confirms that the anonymous motion filed with this court, the one attempting to exclude Ms. Bryant based on fabricated identity fraud, originated from a managed email service. The billing address for that service is identical to the registration address of Sablebrook Consulting. She turned to my parents. Furthermore, the report traces 12 separate transfers from the Bryant Civic Fund to Sablebrook Consulting over the last 18 months. These transfers were labeled as administrative retainers. However, the corresponding withdrawals from the Sablebrook account were used to pay for personal credit card bills, a vehicle lease in the name of Mark Bryant, and significantly, a fee to a private security firm known for digital reputation management. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing shut. The court's patience is gone. Judge Vance said, "We are no longer dealing with a family dispute. We are dealing with a coordinated effort to defraud this estate and manipulate this court." She looked at me. "Ms. Bryant," she said, "you may take the stand." I stood up. I walked to the end of the table. I did not sit. I stood with my hands resting on the back of the chair. "Ms. Bryant, do you have a statement regarding these findings?" the judge asked. "I do, Your Honor." I said. I took a breath. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at the judge. I needed to build the wall, brick by brick. For the past 2 weeks, I have been told that I am confused. I began. My voice was steady, low, resonating in the quiet room. I have been told that I am stressed. I have been told that my grandfather was senile. I have been told that the detention I experienced at Cedar Line Airport was a random security glitch. I paused, but the pattern speaks for itself. I continued. It is a coherent narrative of interference. It began with the misuse of my credit history 6 years ago to fund a lifestyle my parents could not afford. It continued with the creation of the Bryant Civic Fund, a charity in name only, designed to siphon assets away from the oversight of the primary estate, and it culminated 2 weeks ago, when it became clear that Arthur Bryant had placed a lock on the vault that only I could open. I looked at Mark. He flinched. The tip to the airport police was not random. I said, it was specific. It used legal terminology designed to trigger a hold. The text messages I received used language specific to private family conversations. The attempt to access the security file used a forged signature. The bank's attempt to have me sign a statement blaming my own mental health was a scripted effort to neutralize my credibility. I turned back to the judge. This was not an emotional reaction to grief. Your Honor, it was a business strategy. The goal was to remove the verifying beneficiary so that the fraud could be buried forever. Diane's attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had been silent until now, stood up. He looked flustered, tasked with defending the indefensible. Objection, Your Honor, he said. Ms. Bryant is speculating on intent. This is vindictive. He gestured at me. Look at her, he said. She has come here to destroy her parents. She is estranged. She is angry. She is twisting administrative errors into a conspiracy because she wants revenge for some childhood slight. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I didn't glare. I didn't raise my voice. I felt a cold, calm clarity wash over me. I turned to him. If I wanted revenge, I would shout. I said. I gestured to the stack of evidence on the table. I am here with paperwork. The room went quiet. The objection died in the air. There was no anger in my voice, only the devastating weight of facts. I wasn't a daughter having a tantrum. I was the auditor. Judge Vance looked at Mr. Henderson. Sit down, counselor, she said. She turned to Ruth Ellison. Miss Ellison, the court accepts the narrative of interference. Please proceed with the provisions of the Arthur Bryant Resilience Trust regarding proven tampering. Ruth stood up. She looked solemn. She opened the sealed packet that had been sitting on the table, the one Arthur had marked with a red warning label. Mr. Bryant anticipated that the discovery of fraud might be painful, Ruth said, but he was clear about the consequences. She began to read from the document. In the event that any beneficiary is found to have actively interfered with the administration of the estate, or to have engaged in financial deception regarding estate assets, the following clause is triggered. Ruth looked up. First, the discretionary portion of the estate, the $2 million in liquid assets and the family home is immediately diverted away from the family line. The entirety of the residuary estate shall be transferred to the Gateway Housing Initiative, a charitable trust for victims of financial abuse. I heard Diane gasp, a sharp, sucking sound. Second, Ruth continued, her voice relentless. Any sums previously advanced by Arthur Bryant to the disqualified beneficiaries, including the $450,000 paid to secure the family residence 6 years ago, are immediately recalled. They are to be treated as demand loans. payable to the estate within 90 days. Ruth lowered the paper. However, Arthur Bryant included a mercy provision. The interest on these recalled loans shall be waived, and a payment plan established, only if the beneficiaries provide a full, sworn confession of their actions and cooperate fully with the transfer of assets. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. They were losing everything. The inheritance was gone. The house was effectively gone, turned into a debt they couldn't pay. Arthur had set a trap that didn't just catch them, it stripped them bare. Mark exploded. It wasn't a physical explosion. He didn't flip the table, but his face turned a violent shade of red, and he slammed his hand down on the wood. "This is insane," he shouted. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "He is doing this. He is controlling us from the grave." He pointed at the empty chair where Arthur would have been. "He always did this," Mark yelled. "He dangled the money like a carrot and then pulled it away to watch us jump. He knew we needed it. He knew we were underwater." "Mark," Diane hissed, grabbing his arm. "Stop it." "I am not stopping," Mark shouted, shaking her off. "Look at what he did. He left it all to a housing project to strangers, just to spite us, just to prove he was better than us. He looked at me with pure venom. And you?" He said, "You are enjoying this. You are just like him. You think you are so righteous. You think you are the only one with integrity." I didn't flinch. "I don't think I am righteous, Dad," I said quietly. "I think I'm tired." Diane let out a sob. It was a broken, jagged sound. She slumped forward, putting her head in her hands. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." She wept. Her voice was muffled, fractured. "We just needed time." "Time for what, Mrs. Bryant?" Evan asked gently. Diane looked up. Her makeup was smeared. She looked old. "To move the money," she whispered, "to cover the loans before the audit. We thought if Hazel didn't show up, the box wouldn't open. We thought we could fix it before anyone knew." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I contacted someone," she admitted, "a friend of a friend. He said he could flag her passport. He said it would just be a delay, just 24 hours. I didn't know they would interrogate her. I didn't know it would be police. I just wanted to slow her down." She was minimizing. She was admitting to the tip, but framing it as a harmless delay tactic. She was still trying to protect herself from the reality of what she had done. Evan pressed, his voice soft but firm, and the anonymous submission to the court. "Mrs. Bryant." The one claiming Hazel was a fraud, who filed that. Diane hesitated. She looked at Varen. Varen was staring at the wall, disavowing them with his posture. I don't know the details," Diane stammered. Mark spoke. His voice was rough, scraping. "It was supposed to be a warning." We all looked at him. "It was supposed to be a warning," Mark repeated, "to scare her off, to make her think she was walking into a trap if she came here." I looked at him. "Stop fighting it. He didn't choose you. It was supposed to be a warning." The phrasing mirrored the text messages perfectly. The connections snapped into place like a lock clicking shut. Judge Vance leaned forward. "Mr. Bryant, are you admitting that you authorized the filing of a false motion to this court?" Mark looked at the judge. He looked at the ruin of his life. "We didn't have a choice," he said bitterly. Judge Vance sat back. She looked at the bailiff. "The court accepts the admissions of the beneficiaries," she said. She picked up her gavel. "I am formally referring this matter to the district attorney's office for an investigation into fraud, perjury, and interference with a judicial proceeding." The words hung in the air. District attorney, investigation, fraud. The courtroom buzzed with the realization. This wasn't a probate hearing anymore. It was the prologue to an indictment. Judge Vance looked at me. "Ms. Bryant, the court recognizes your role as the verifying beneficiary. You have fulfilled your duty. The tampering is proven. The clause is triggered." She paused. "However, given the gravity of the situation and the potential for a protracted criminal investigation, there is an alternative." Lyle Varen stood up. He looked like he was trying to salvage a shipwreck. "Your Honor," he said, "if I may." The judge nodded. Viren turned to me. He didn't smile. He looked desperate. "Ms. Bryant," he said, "Trellis and Rowe, along with the family, are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement to resolve all civil matters today." He slid a new folder across the table. "We have increased the offer," Viren said, $500,000, immediate wire transfer. I looked at the folder. $500,000, but, Viren added, his voice dropping, "the terms remain. Confidentiality, a complete seal on the record, the withdrawal of the fraud allegations. The family agrees to the diversion of the remaining assets to the housing grant, but the investigation stops. The reputation of the bank and the family is preserved." It was the clean exit. I could walk away with $500,000. My parents would lose the inheritance, but they would stay out of prison. The bank would bury the scandal. The housing grant would get the money. Everyone would get something. Or I could say no. I could let the referral stand. I could push for full accountability. My parents would likely face charges. The bank would be exposed. The legal fight would drag on for years, public and ugly. I would get nothing but the trustee fee and the knowledge that I had burned the corruption to the ground. Judge Vance looked at me. "Ms. Bryant," she said, "the choice is yours. You can accept the settlement and end this today, or you can proceed with the full execution of the trust's penalty clauses, which will include the criminal referral." I looked at the folder. I looked at my parents. "I need a moment," I said. The judge nodded. "The court is in recess for 10 minutes. I walked out of the conference room into the hallway. The marble floor was cold under my feet. I walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. A flat sheet of slate. I took my phone out of my pocket. I plugged in my earbuds. I opened the file. Arthur's letter. I skipped to the end. I needed to hear it again. "You wanted to know me," his voice whispered. "They only wanted to know what I had. That is why you are the safeguard. Because you know the value of things, not just the price." I listened to his breathing, the rattle in his chest. "Finish it, Hazel," he said. "Turn on the lights, and then walk away." I paused the recording before the final goodbye. I stood there, looking at the city of Ashford. Arthur had set the trap. He had written the script. He had cast me as the avenger, the sword of truth. He had loved me, yes, but he had also used me. He had made me the instrument of his final lesson to his children. I realized I had been living in other people's stories my whole life. I had been the disappointment in my parents' story. I had been the protege in Arthur's story. I had been the victim in the bank story. But what was my story? Was I the woman who destroyed her family to prove a point? Or was I the woman who saved herself? People who fear daylight will always try to break the lamp. I wasn't just the lamp anymore. I was the one holding the switch. I took the earbuds out. I put the phone away. I turned around and walked back toward the heavy wooden doors. I pushed them open. The room went silent as I entered. Diane looked up, hope and terror warring in her eyes. Mark looked away. Varen looked at his watch. I walked to the table. I stood behind my chair. Judge Vance looked at me. "Ms. Bryant," she said, "have you reached a decision regarding the settlement versus continued litigation?" I looked at my parents, two people who loved in the way they understood, which was transactional and fearful, two people who had sold me for a house, two people who were terrified of the dark they had built for themselves. And then I looked at the folder with the $500,000 offer, the price of silence, the price of peace. I looked at Evan. He gave me a small nod. "Whatever you choose." I took a breath. The air filled my lungs, cool and clean. I looked at the judge. "I have, Your Honor," I said. I placed my hand on the folder. I felt the texture of the paper. I thought about the housing grant. I thought about the prison cells. I thought about the years of court dates. I thought about my life in Lake Briar. The rain, the quiet. I looked at Diane and Mark one last time, and I made my choice. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope Hazel's journey resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts on Hazel's final position. Did she choose the path of total justice or the path of peace? Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more dramas about family, betrayal, and the cost of truth. Share your theories in the comments in English.